Good morning to all of you. I hope you've had time to rest this weekend, that everything's well concerning the situation, and that you reflected upon everything we said on Aristotle's ethics, the Nicomachean ethics, and are ready to start a new text today. So we are again in the notions of being good and living well. Okay, so the good, of course, not being good as in good boy, but being good and living well. So let's do Hume today, and I think it will take us at least 2 sessions, and this will leave us with some Plato and Plotinus. Okay, so I think since Hume was planned for the 22nd of April, we can safely say that we are very much ahead of our program. First of all, a reminder, not a reminder, but I need to speak to you a little bit about Hume, because if we don't understand where he's coming from, it's hard to understand his version of where the sources of morals come from. David Hume belongs to what's called the empiricist school. The empiricist school's father, in some ways, is from the second half of the 17th century, especially the end of the 17th century, last quarter, if you like, is John Locke. The empiricist school came in opposition to the rationalist school. So the rationalist school is represented by people like Descartes, whom we are not reading this semester. The empiricist school is called empiricist because, in a way, it's in opposition to the rationalist school. It is easy to understand the word rationalists. Rationalist, we think immediately of reason. So the rationalist school always relied on reason. Reason, of course, being the locus of all universal judgments, all universal ideas, right? Such as most of the ideas they thought of mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4 is always true universally, whether you be in Lebanon, you be in France, you be anywhere in the world. So the rationalist school believes that there are certain universal things that are part of our reason. That's why we have science, we can all learn mathematics, we can all learn even physics, because there are some universal things in human reason. And so, anytime we want to find the truth, we have to always go to reason, refer our problems to reason, and thus be rational. We say rational because the word reason in Latin is ratio, R-A-T-I-O. Ratio gives us rational. So the answer is always reason. Of course, that means that everything that comes from the sensory world is an object of doubt, as the father of the rationalist school says. Which means, as Descartes says, Descartes being the father of the modern rationalist school in the 17th century. We are in the first half of the 17th century with Descartes. So, sometime before Locke. So, the rationalist school, to be very general, we're not going to enter into it, says you only get truth from the inspection of reason, so do not rely on the information you obtain, today we would say the data you obtain from your senses. Okay? We cannot rely on the senses, on sensation, to get the truth. So we have in our mind ideas. Some, of course, come by our reason working on what the understanding receives from the world, right? So we can have an idea of a chair, an idea of a horse, because we have met a horse, but after the inspection of reason, it's reason that forms these, what are called factus ideas. These are ideas made by reason in its experience of the world. But there are, of course, many ideas also that are innate, inborn, if you like, innate ideas in us, such as all the ideas of mathematics, all the axioms of mathematics. To take the most simple one, two parallel lines meet at the infinite, or two parallel lines never meet, more commonly today. This, for a rationalist, is a universal idea that we have, all of us, because we are rational beings. It's universal, and what we call a priori, a, and then priori, Priori. It means before experience, independent of experience, universal, always true. The opposite of a priori is a posteriori. So, once again, we do not trust our senses. We do not trust our senses before we judge them. So, once reason judges things, we can say we have some clarity. So the search is always for clear and distinct ideas in reason that we know then are true. Reason and its clear and distinct ideas are the criteria of truth. Now, that means once again, I repeat, we do not trust sensation. So, what is the word for sensation in Greek? As you know, in philosophy, we always go back to the original Greek words for the important terms. Well, the word for sensation, which we find, for example, in Aristotle, but in many writers of ancient Greece, is empirii. E-M-P-I-R-I, if you like. Empirii. So, empirii is sensation. So when we are speaking about the school of empiricism, when we are speaking about the empiricist school, this means we are talking about the school that says truth and ideas come from sensation. It's the opposite of the rationalist school. There was a big dispute, a big controversy in the 17th century around the origin. The word for origin, birth of something, is genesis. So about the genesis of our ideas. How are they born? Of course, for the rationalist school, they are born thanks to reason, from reason. And for the empiricist school, they are born from sensation, to be very brief. Now, if we say that, it means that everything comes from sensation first. So everything comes a posteriori first. Okay? A posteriori, the opposite of universal, a priori, independent of experience. A posteriori, so written A, and then posteriori, P-O-S-T-R-E-R-I-O-R-I. Okay? A posteriori. So everything comes from experience. So it's a priori for rationalists, a posteriori for empiricist. Now, if we go very far in this, we find David Hume, our guy today. David Hume then says, truth, indeed, ideas that we have come from a posteriori, from experience. Okay. There is, of course, a big problem in saying this that should concern us less today with regard to morals, but it means, of course, that there is nothing that is purely universal. Okay? We do not have a priori, so we do not have universal. Everything we get starts individually, individual experience. My experience of the world, your experience of the world, so on. Everything starts from my sensation. Sensation is, of course, individual, Okay? When I am touching here this book, you are not touching it. Every experience for empiricists is individual. So David Hume then says, we don't really have a way to prove the universal, that there's anything universal. We live as if they are true, but we should rather remember that we have no proof for them. Okay? Let's keep that then in mind. This means what? It means, of course, that there is problem in teaching something like physics. If I say physics, we don't know, we cannot prove anything in it 100%. It's always, let's say, 99.99% probable. So we live on probability. So Hume, to take an example, says, okay, if I see every day, let me take this example, the sun, and then I touch a stone that sees the sun, that has the sun on it, I see that the stone is hot. I do that many times. I first have sun, then heat in the stone. From that, I say this is a succession, right? One thing after the other. But from this succession, I make a judgment that is not based on sensation. I say that the sun is the cause of the heat in the stone. Of course, when I say that, says Hume, I only say it because I am used to seeing this. After I see it 100 times, I start to believe. Repetition leads to belief. That tomorrow the same will happen. So Hume says all we have is belief. We don't have universals. Okay, we don't have a proof for universals. Maybe they are true, but we don't have a proof. So all I can say is that I believe it's most probable that tomorrow the sun will shine. Okay, this is what we call, of course, skepticism. الريبية بالعربي. التشكيك والريبية. So it means, of course, that this is a big challenge to any kind of rationalist way of looking at anything in the world. That means also that we have a challenge to Kant. Remember, we read the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. The groundwork for the metaphysics of morals relies heavily on the law of reason, which is universal. So we cannot go to the law of reason simply because we don't know what is universal. We cannot claim that anything reason says is the most universal thing. We're going to need another source of our morals than just pure rationality or than the purely rational law that Kant propounds. So we have to go somewhere else. And this is where David Hume is going to try to establish sources of our morals, a new way for the sources of our morals. Please note, as I say this, that David Hume is before Kant. Please don't ever write on an exam that David Hume is reacting to Kant. David Hume came before Kant. It's Kant who's reacting to Hume. That's another matter, of course, that you can look up. So, again, David Hume is an empiricist and skeptic. Okay? He's an empiricist because he relies on experience. And he's a skeptic because he says we don't have any proof, 100% proof. We just have, for any law of reason, all we have, or anything universal, we don't have then proof, we have belief. Imagine saying that physics is based on belief, then it's no longer science. Okay? So, and Hume says how we get the truth is we always go to the impression on my senses, right? I have my 5 senses. The impression of my senses, on my senses, is true because it's the most vivid. When I have on my senses an impression from this chair in front of me, this is very vivid, it's the strongest, it's the most true. When the chair is absent, I have a kind of copy of it in my mind that I call idea. So the idea is in the absence of the actual chair. So the idea is weaker. Okay, is the opposite of rationalism. So we cannot rely on mere ideas if to say that something is universally true. We have to always go back to the impression. Okay, so this is his empiricism that's also skepticism. Now we're going to move to the sources of morals today and work step by step through Hume's text. At first, I think we can read everything. Huh? So work with me. This is in your book. It's going to be page 1. At the bottom of the page, you'll see that the pages are printed horizontally here. Landscape printing, landscape format. Section 1, the general sources of morals. This is only what we need for our reading. Excerpts then from the beginning, or we have the excerpt as the beginning of section 1. The general sources of morals. Let's see the context. The disputes that one has with men who are stubbornly obstinate in their principles are the most tiresome of all, except perhaps for the disputes with perfectly insincere people who don't really believe the opinions they defend, but engage in the controversy because they enjoy it or because they want to show how much cleverer and more ingenious they are than the rest of mankind. Both kinds of disputants show the same blind adherence to their own arguments, the same contempt for their opponents, and the same emotional intensity in pushing their bad arguments and false doctrines. Neither kind gets through reasoning the views he is defending, so it's no use expecting to be able to move them from falsehood to truth by reasoning. The only logic they will be moved by is the logic that speaks to the feelings. Okay. This is just the context that Hume likes to put us in. So he says some people, of course, have principles, they are obstinate about them. And so it's very hard when somebody just believes in something and whatever you tell them, they're not going to talk about it, they're not going to discuss it. We know today we call these people dogmatic, right? They are dogmatic, متعصبين لأي شيء. It could be a religion, but it could be a party. It could be a party doctrine. It could be a philosophical doctrine that they refuse to put into question, and so on. So, of course, these are very hard discussions to have. Now, not with all of them. Those who are just disputing to dispute are easily gotten rid of, if you like. Anyways, anybody who shows blind adherence, if you like, to their arguments are very hard to talk to. Because the only way to think of things, what he's saying logic here, calling logic here, and of course between inverted commas, is just to say this is not philosophical logic. It's some kind of way of thinking that is totally unacceptable or not convincing. You know a lot of these people. Okay. And he says with only people like this, you cannot reason, you cannot talk, you cannot speak philosophically very well. All you can do is speak to their feelings. Okay? Make them feel bad, make them feel good, etc. and so on. Feelings. Let's continue. Now, those who have denied the reality of moral distinctions, so we're going now into people who don't believe that there are moral distinctions, can be classified among the insincere disputants. So who just dispute to dispute. I continue. It simply isn't conceivable that any human being could ever seriously believe that all kinds of people and all kinds of behavior are equally entitled to everyone's affection and regard. Nature will make one man so different from another, and this difference is made so much greater still by upbringing, how he is raised, example, and habit, that when we compare the two men, we have to be aware of how unalike they are, how dissimilar they are, different. That they are somewhat different couldn't be questioned by the most thorough skeptic or denied by the most confident dogmatist. However numb a person is with regard to his fellow men, he must often be visited by thoughts of right and wrong. And however firmly wedded he is to his prejudices, he must be aware that the other people are also given to such thoughts. So the only way to convert an antagonist of this kind, that is to say, id est, one who denies that there are moral differences between man and man, is to leave him to himself. When he finds that nobody is willing to argue with him, he will probably end up, out of sheer boredom, coming over to the side of common sense and reason. I liked reading this with you to show you how great a writer also David Hume is. He's always ironic, he's always at times even cynical. And it always doesn't make you laugh, it makes you smile. He's describing the different people who say there is no moral distinctions and so on and so forth, right? He says even such people they know deep in themselves that there is something of a morality, no matter how different people are. And he says anyways, the only way to convert such people, to change them, is to just leave them alone. There's no way to dispute with them, to reason with them if you like. Just leave them alone, and little by little, of course, they will realize nobody's listening to them. They will come back and start to want to listen and talk out of boredom. They'll get bored, nobody's talking to them. So eventually they will come to realize, okay, I should chat about this if you like. I hate the word chat, of course. In philosophy we don't chat about things, we reason about things, we think together about things. So he'll come to start thinking a little bit about the issue of morality. So this is a kind of statement for Hume in this paragraph against any form of excessive, if you like, relativism. There is, of course, things are relative to each human. He is an empiricist after all, Hume, right? So each individual has her or his own experience, right? But that doesn't mean this saying that my experience is relative to me, if you like. It doesn't mean that there are no principles of morals, no sources, if you like, of morals, that there are no morals that we can respect in our dealings in society. Okay? So if somebody says that, no, it's all relative, okay, there is no way to dispute with this guy, just leave him alone, and he will realize that we cannot live without morals, and so there are such things as morals we follow. Okay? Let's continue after this little smile and nod from Hume. He says, a serious controversy has started up recently, one that is worth engaging in, about the general foundation of morals. This was a dispute. We are in the 18th century with Hume, right? So we are after, of course, after Descartes in the first half of the 17th, after Locke in the second half of the 17th, and now we are in the first half of the 18th century. We are in the 18th century and a bit afterwards. Okay. So a serious controversy has started up. It was in the 18th century about the general foundation of morals, in the century of the Enlightenment, of course. What is it? Three questions are at the heart of this controversy. First, are morals derived from reason or from sentiment or feeling, sensation? There is a closeness in meaning here between sentiment and feeling. In other words, what I want to say is about sensation and feeling. It's something you feel with your senses and at the same time you feel inside. Our own word for feeling. It's kind of encapsulates both, the word sentiment. So are morals derived from reason or from sentiment? Of course, now you know, are morals rational? Is there rational foundation for morals? Like Cartesians maybe will say, the followers of Descartes, the rationalists. Or do they come from sensation, sentiment, right? So the empiricists. So it's the controversy, of course, between rationalists and empiricists on the sources of morals. Second, part of the controversy. Do we get our knowledge of them, of what? The foundation of morals, right? The morals then. Do we get our knowledge of morals by a chain of argument and induction, or by an immediate feeling and final internal sense? Another question. So, do we induce from different experiences that we have, right? Induce is the opposite of deduce. The empiricists may go to induction, but never to pure deduction. The rationalists follow deduction. It means from the general, the universal, you go to the particular. I start with two parallel lines never meet as an axiom, and I deduce things from it. This is rationalist. But in induction, I see particular examples, I observe, observation, and from them I induce, right? We often confuse the two terms. If I see you come to university every day, I induce that you are a student. I see so many times, so many particular examples, singular examples that are the same. I induce something. Normally in everyday life we just say deduce. I deduce that he's a student. This is wrong, in fact, our language use. We should say induce. So do we kind of have a chain of argument and induction? Is there some kind of argumentation going on to determine what are the principles of morals, or foundation of what is the foundation of morals? What are morals? Or is it something like an immediate feeling we have inside? Feeling and finer internal sense. Is it something inside us that we feel from an internal sense? This controversy, of course, is at the heart of empiricism too. Third, should moral opinions, like all good sound, sound is good, all sound judgments of truth and falsehood. So should moral opinions be the same for every rational intelligent being? Or are they, like the perception of beauty and ugliness, based entirely on the particular makeup of the human species? Okay. So again, should moral opinions be the same for every rational intelligent being, or are they based entirely on the particular makeup of the human species? Is it only humans that would have something like that? Or are other intelligent creatures with morals, even like angels or something, or any creature that we might imagine? This is another point which is not going to be very important. So, the most important are the first two. Are morals derived from reason or from sentiment? And do we get knowledge of them? Do we need to do a whole chain of argument and induction, or is there a feeling, a moral feeling in us? We will, as we see, for example, in Rousseau, but we unfortunately not doing Rousseau. For Rousseau, there is a moral feeling in humans. Okay. I continue with Hume. The ancient philosophers, of course, we know a lot of them. There's Aristotle, we saw also Epicurus, we read Seneca, so we read Aristotelian ethics, but also Epicurean ethics and Stoic ethics. So the ancient philosophers often assert that virtue is nothing but conformity to reason. But their writings generally suggest that they think that morals derive their existence from taste and sentiment. And on the other side, our modern inquirers talk a great deal about the beauty of virtue and ugliness of vice, seeming to imply that their basis is sentiment or feeling. But they have commonly tried to account for the virtue or vice distinction by metaphysical reasonings and by deductions from the most abstract principles of the understanding. There has been so much confusion in these subjects that a really important opposition between two systems could pass unnoticed, until recently, that is. Why recently this changed? Because the elegant Lord Shaftesbury, who first called this distinction to our attention, and who in general accepted the principles of the ancients, is himself not entirely free from the same confusion. So he brought this to our attention, but of course he too had the same muddling in this confusion. What is Hume saying to us? He's basically saying to us why he wrote his book, why he's writing about the morals, right? Because he says, if we look at the ancient philosophers, we notice that they say that virtue is something rational, something that comes from our reason. Okay, so somehow they are old rationalists, before the word came, right? Before Descartes. But we can say that they rely on reason, what would be called in Greek nous, the theoretical in our mind, but also even the work of phronesis, which is a practical reason. Anyways, he would say that what he's saying is that these ancient philosophers often say that virtue is conformity to reason. So we have a rational part in it. But he says there's a problem. They contradict themselves because when they write, they usually suggest, they seem to suggest every time that they think that morals come from their existence. That the morals derive their existence from taste and sentiment. And of course, this is based on feelings. So, on sensation. Okay? So, there's a confusion. On the one hand, they say that virtue is in conformity to reason, is what conforms to reason. And at the same time, they say, but virtue, that is the foundation of morals, is a question of taste and sentiment, which is the opposite of reason. It's experience. Right? So, there's a confusion there. And he says modern inquirers also are in a confusion, and he's thinking, let's be specific here, of empiricists. Okay, the empiricists say, our modern inquirers, they talk about beauty of virtue, ugliness of vice. They are beautiful or ugly. So it's a question of taste, and the question of taste is a question of sentiment and feeling. How do you feel about this? This is good. This is not good. So beauty is good, it's virtue, and ugliness is bad, it's vice. But how do they defend themselves? How do they account for this? How do they prove it? Hume says then they enter contradiction because they account for virtue and vice by metaphysical reasonings. So metaphysical here means rational. By rational reasonings, by deductions, not induction, from the most abstract principles of the understanding. So they say they're also in contradiction. They are ambiguous because they say on the one hand that morals are a question of feelings, of sensation in the end, of taste and so sensation. But to prove this, they use rational arguments. So the ancients and the moderns are ambiguous. They are in contradiction with themselves, right? Once again, the ancients say that virtue is something rational, but they go to experience for it, and the opposite for moderns. They say that it's something to do with sensation, taste and sensation, but they go to reason to prove it. Lord Shaftesbury brought this to the attention of many, and Lord Shaftesbury is really great to read. I advise you to read him, especially on art, actually. But even he himself falls into the same confusion, the same ambiguity. And so, of course, Hume has to intervene. This is, of course, the justification by Hume of his writing this essay, on morals. We're going to see afterwards that Hume is going to present the arguments on both sides of the question. In other words, the rationalist arguments, which we have on this page immediately. Admittedly, there are plausible arguments on both sides of the question. On the side of the view that moral distinctions are discernible by pure reason, there is this line of thought. So this is the first one. And if you go to page 3, you will see the first paragraph. On the other side, those who hold that all moral views are matters of sentiment, so empiricists may say things like this. He's going to take then himself the rationalist side to expose it, and the empiricist side to expose it, and to see which one is right, or can one be right partially and the other totally? Or are they both wrong? Are they both right partially, and can we reconcile them? Okay, this is going to be his development next. Okay. I think for today this is good. We can stop and we will continue next time. I want you to take the time to read the rest of this, to reflect on it. I'm sure next time you can do 1 and 2 and then draw Hume's conclusion. If we don't finish it all, next time we'll finish it the time afterwards, but I think we can finish it next time. Look at then the argument from rationalists, the argument from empiricists as exposed, and then at Hume's solution to the problem. Thank you for listening today. It was a very nice, simple introductory lecture. I hope I put you in media res in the middle of things, and you can slowly but surely read and understand the rest of Hume. Thank you for listening. We'll speak again Thursday.